Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'll be continuing my discussion as to my love towards Life is Strange 2 here. We're going to enter into episode 4 where I get to put on my critical cap for a little bit because there are some things that happened in episode 4 that I don't necessarily agree with. This is probably my least favorite of the 5 episodes. Not to say that I hate it or anything, but there are some stuff there that I'm just not a fan of. Episode 4 starts off with a pretty powerful moment. You go all the way back to the forest scene from the first episode, and you and Daniel are sitting on the log, you're having your conversation, and it becomes rather apparent that this is a dream just based on the conversations that you and Daniel are having based on that point. Like, the conversations that you would be having at that point of the story are not the conversations you're having right here in episode 4. And then, of course, Daniel explains that he's all alone and afraid, and you need to come find him, and kind of jumps off the cliff. And then, boom, Sean wakes up. He's in the hospital. He's shaven, and he's got an eye patch. And here we are. The ramifications of episode 3's ending is now in our face here. And so I think it has a very strong opening. Like, that dream sequence was strong, and then seeing where Sean is now and how episode 3 has affected him, that was all a very strong start. You meet Joey and you do your little vision test. And that was kind of, in my opinion, the first kind of area where they dropped the ball with episode 4. Episode 4 introduces Sean's vision problem as a possible gameplay mechanic, which I think was a huge lost opportunity, because in a story-based game like this, having someone's eyesight be negatively affected by gameplay or by something that happened, that's a huge part. And it was, like I said, a huge missed opportunity, because aside from this kind of hospital sequence, his vision impairment really doesn't hold any merit for the rest of the story. So after that, you meet Agent Flores, who's the FBI agent who Sean is under the care of. You kind of do the interrogation with her. You can tell her the truth. You can lie. It's just basically, I mean, I've always just told her the truth because I never was for the plan that Finn developed anyway. So at any rate, you learn that really no one knows where Daniel is. Daniel's still missing, and so that's kind of the core concept of episode 4, is finding Daniel. At some point in time after Flores leaves, he decides he's gonna... Oh, he gets his notebook back. He gets his notebook back, and he figures out where Daniel is. He's with Jacob, in Haven Point. So then you devise a plan to escape, and you're off to Haven Point, Nevada, and you're gonna go find Daniel. So the stage is set for episode 4. We're still going pretty strong at this point. I love the escape sequence. There's multiple ways to escape: by window, by Joey's cooperation, by attacking Joey, or by attacking the guard. I've never successfully persuaded Joey to help me, but at the same time, I don't have the heart to actually attack him, so I always just escaped by window. But once again, in story-based games like this, I think it's important to have instances like that, where the player feels like they're still playing a game, where the choices are still theirs to make. So when you're just in the hospital and your mission is to escape, and you're kind of exploring your limited resources here to figure out how to get out of the hospital, I feel like that's a solid gameplay moment for this game, which in a story-based game, they have very, very few solid gameplay moments, but this one really stuck out to me. So you get out, you get in the car, and you drive off into kind of an amazing little sequence there, get to admire the artwork again. Once again, this is just a beautiful game, artistically speaking, between the music and the graphics and everything. So you're just kind of listening to A Long Road Ahead. You're watching him drive and try and stay awake. And then you break into Nevada, and he pulls over to the side of the road. You can try and clean your eye and then call it a night, essentially. You're not too far from Haven Point, and things are starting to kind of look up. So when you go to sleep, you wake up into another dream sequence. These dream sequences are really, in my opinion, where episode 4 shines. Aside from that glimpse of gameplay you get in the very beginning, these 2 dream sequences at the very, very start of the episode, the introduction, and then this dream sequence in the car, I think are fantastic. And it's a bold move for a story-based game because story-based games don't typically do flashbacks and dream sequences and things of that nature. But the way in which Life is Strange 2 handles these things, it makes you feel like you're actually part of a legitimate story. It legitimizes the story, and it's wonderful. So you have this dream sequence, you're driving with your dad, and it gives you the opportunity as a player to get some atonement with what happened with Esteban. And even though it's through a dream and it's not real, it's kind of the best kind of atonement you have. If you're one of the people who didn't hug him in the first scene, then it gives you the chance to kind of make things up for that. And then, so of course, you're woken up by the racist people who claim that you're squatting in their land. It's never really clearly explained whether or not they're just bullshitting you or if they're just like trying to be racist and hassling you or if this is actually their land. But at any rate, you get pulled out the car and you have to deal with this guy's crap, and then you either get beat up or you don't get asked to sing, or you get asked to sing and you do sing, which the singing sequence is so like awfully humiliating. Like, I've only sung for these guys once and I instantly decided I'm never doing that again. That was like possibly one of the cringiest moments of the series, and cringy in like in a good way. Like, they wrote it so well and it was performed so well, but it like makes you never want to do it again, you know? So after that, the racist people leave. You drive your car as far as it can go, and then you're stranded in the desert. And I had mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again because the political aspect of Life is Strange 2 is where it gets a lot of its heat. And I feel like they do this, like I said, more so to ground the players in reality, make you feel like you're actually playing something that is real, as opposed to just a game or a conjured story of some sorts. So by doing this, you're grounded in reality. So at any rate, one thing that I always mention about this series that they do so well is they show you the very worst of humanity, and then they usually couple it by showing you the very best of humanity. So we got pulled over by the racist people just a few moments ago, and then we're about to run into Anton, the truck driver, who is as nice as can be. So I think that is a huge, important balance that they work with here, going from worst of humanity, racist assholes, to best of humanity, Anton, who's willing to give you his lunch and whatever he can to help you out. So Anton takes you to Haven Point, assuming that you chose to go with Anton and didn't choose to walk, which I've never chosen to do, and I'm kind of curious to see how that goes. But at any rate, you get to Haven Point, you run into the sick little girl that we learn is Sarah Lee, and you run into her dad, I believe, which would also be Jacob's dad. And then you're invited into the church, and this is where you discover, oh, Daniel's here, and these crazy church people are kind of worshiping his power, and so there's some kind of weird voodoo going on there. So with the whole Daniel sequence, this is where things start to go downhill for me. So you're introduced to Daniel in this church, and he does not seem happy at all. Like, when you get his first introduction, he almost seems like sedated. And so it's like he's unhappy. He's just performing his powers just to make these church people happy. Then he's shoved off into the room or whatever. So I was like right off the bat, like, okay, so I was like, what's going on here? And so you get down there to meet him, and he's so excited to see you. And you guys hug, you make up, depending on the dialogue choices you make. You either blame him or you don't blame him. It's all just kind of a wishy-washy situation, but it all feels good. And then what happens with Lisbeth after the fact, so you meet up with Daniel, you guys have your big coming back moment. Lisbeth sends Daniel and Sarah Lee away, and you have your first kind of confrontation with Lisbeth. And she ends up faking the fact that you hit her, which paints you, of course, as a villain. And so Daniel comes out, he sides with Lisbeth, decides that you need to leave and that he's staying in this church. And that's kind of the first instance where I'm like, okay, hold on, we need to pump the brakes here. This is where episode 4 kind of starts to fall apart for me. So earlier, when you guys reunited, Daniel admits that not only did he think you were dead, but he thinks that he had killed you. So it's hard for me to grasp the idea that he went from thinking he had killed you, thinking you were dead, to being okay with just sending you off and saying, "No, I'm staying at the church. You go do your own thing." I don't buy that level of friction. Pretty sure in this instance with anybody, if they thought that they had killed their brother, or even if they just thought that their brother was dead, only to learn that he wasn't dead, they're not going to just dismiss him and be like, "Okay, I'm glad you're still alive. Now go do your thing. I'm going to stay here." So that was my first kind of major issue. And then, so you're escorted out by Jacob's dad or Lisbeth's husband. I get the two mixed up all the time. This is where we first meet Karen. So Karen approaches you at the gate, out the outside of that gated Haven Point property. Karen's been name dropped. She's been hinted at. She's been everything under the sun, other than introduced in this series by this point. And so once Karen gets involved, you know, okay, things are starting to pick up here. You ride back to Karen's motel. She leaves you alone, and you shower and you call Jacob and figure out the meeting point or whatever. But really, the juicy part of this scene is talking to Karen. That's what we're all sitting here waiting for. We want to have that conversation. So I asked her one question, and that was why. Why did she leave? And she gives you a very selfish answer. So I will say, in my opinion, that Karen is probably the best written character of Life is Strange 2, in the fact that she is written so well that she makes people, like, despise her. Even though, like, what she did feels very organic. Like, what she did feels very organic in the fact that, like, I could totally see a woman or anyone doing what she did for the reasons in which she did them. But at the same time, most people can recognize that as not a very good choice or a very selfish choice. And so that's why it's very hard to explain. But in my opinion, even though Karen is my least favorite character, and Karen as a person and as a character, I despise her, I can at least recognize that she's also probably the best written character of the story, which is a really big thing to say when you consider how well written Sean is. I would say the writing for Daniel's a little weak, but Sean is also a very strong character. So when you're contending Sean and Karen, to say Karen is the best written character is a pretty huge statement. And like I said, I'm going based off of the fact that it is just so convincing what she did, why she did it, and how that causes us to feel towards her. So all of those organic things is what's kind of giving her what she is. So we run into Karen, we have that conversation, and I just asked why. And she gave her selfish reason as to, oh, well, it just didn't feel right to me, or whatever she says. And I shut her down at that point. I was like, all right, all I needed to know was why. I know why, and I didn't like your answer. It was crap. Peace. So you go outside, she offers you a smoke, I denied, and she'll talk to you, tell you a sweet little story about her and Esteban whenever they argued or whatever, what have you. And then after that, you're kind of just left outside enjoying the soundtrack and the scenery again. I'll admit I sat there and watched that for quite some time. That song, New Perspectives, I think is what it's called. Either that or Karen, depending on whether or not you're using the original soundtrack or the online soundtrack. They're named differently. But anyway, that track for episode 4 is absolutely fabulous. And I just sat at the motel scene and listened to that track and absorbed the artwork and just enjoyed the experience for quite some time. But at any rate, moving on, we go inside. You kind of have the chance to shut down Karen again when she offers to help you with your eye. She didn't even offer to me. I made my intentions pretty clear. So you get your eye patch. You meet with Jacob. The plan is concocted, and you're putting it into action essentially. So you're gonna go down there. You got to go get the file out of Lisbeth's office in order to figure out what's wrong with Sarah Lee, because Sarah Lee's sick and Lisbeth wants to help save her through prayers, and this is just this whole big old mess. So at any rate, what we've got now is we break into Lisbeth's thing, we find the files, you do your little hide and seek game, and depending upon the actions that you choose, Karen's either going to burn down this church, or I don't know what she does if she doesn't burn out of the church, actually. I've never done the sequence where I deny her help, so I'm not sure how you get out of that. I guess you just get caught by the guy who's looking for you, because that's kind of what it leads up to, is Nicholas comes looking for you, and you're hiding in the closet, and he's about to check the closet, and then everybody's freaking out because the hospital, because the church is on fire, and oh my gosh. And so he leaves, and then you guys leave, and you wind up in... So this is the other confusing thing. You're in like their commune area, which is not their church because their church is on fire, but their commune area is where they have all their services. So I don't know what to call this place at this point. But at any rate, you wind up there. It's you, Daniel, and Lisbeth, and Karen. And you come back to bring Daniel back. We're gonna do it this time. And once again, Daniel disappoints in the fact that not only does he continue to say he doesn't want to go with you, he continues to say he wants to stay in this place where he has shown no interest in staying before, and he attacks you with his powers again. So this is the third time he's attacked you with his powers in this series, I think. Maybe more? No, 4 maybe? When you're in the motel, he attacks you twice in episode 3, and then when you first show up, or now here again in episode 4. And I'm starting to get a little irritated because it's like, okay, the last time you attacked me with your powers, you thought you had killed me. That was this hugely traumatic incident for Daniel. And then we're just going to turn around and keep attacking you with my powers because I want to stay in this weird, crazy church place. And that's just not working for me. So then it becomes this big battle between Sean and Lisbeth and Daniel, and trying to get Daniel back on their side. Quick side note. So I do love the fact, I also can't stand Lisbeth. Like, Lisbeth is a terrible person too. But I love the fact how Lisbeth just absolutely shuts down Karen when Karen keeps trying and plead for Daniel to come back. And Lisbeth is just like, no, like, you are literally nothing to this child. You abandoned him, and now here you are trying to ask for him back, surely out of the fact that you gave birth to him when you have no right to make those kind of assumptions. Or just how she puts that argument and just absolutely shuts down Karen is infinitely satisfying, which is another great moment from episode 4, which for me had very few great moments. But it's like when you have two characters that you absolutely hate, and then one just absolutely shuts down the other in a totally realistic and completely justifiable way, that was satisfying. So anyway, the fight ensues between you trying to convince Daniel, hey, you gotta come out of here, and Lisbeth pulling her, doing whatever she does. And that sequence, they really tried to make that a strong emotional sequence, but for me, it just did not click, because I was already disconnected from the fact that it's like, okay, why is Daniel so hell-bent on staying here? This doesn't make sense. He thought he killed me. He thought I was dead. And now he's just, no, I'm gonna stay here with this lady rather than go with you. And it was not working for me in any way, shape, or form. And then to make matters worse, her husband just starts beating the crap out of you while you're trying to convince Daniel, hey, this is a bad place to be. And it's like, okay, I have a hard time believing that even an 11-year-old child or 10-year-old child, or however old Daniel is at this point, cannot identify the fact that, hey, this is a problem. Okay, these people here in this church are trying to tell me that this is a safe place, a holy ground, and all this stuff, and they're actively attacking my brother whenever he comes to try and get me. So it's like, okay, there's so many things stacked up in against Daniel's favor to want to stay here that it just becomes, in my opinion, bad writing at this point. It's like, it's no longer convincing that, oh, Daniel is just wanting to stay here. Yes, Daniel's had problems with leaving places the entire series. That's been his consistent thing, is he gets comfortable somewhere, he wants to stay there, then they have to leave, and he doesn't like that. But nothing about this situation really spells out, oh, hey, I want to stay here, if you ask me. And so that's what really, Daniel's character and how they handled Daniel's situation really did not work for me. So all the fighting goes down. You convince Daniel to be on your side. and then the place is on fire. You guys got to get out of there, and Lisbeth is blocking the exit. And this is another Lisbeth line that I absolutely enjoy, because if you threaten her with the gun, she'll be like, "I am a woman of God, and I do not fear the afterlife," or what have you. And I love that line. I just had Daniel move her out of the way, but I've played with multiple people who just shot her and just like, no, she's a terrible person. Goodbye. And I mean, that's the joy of a video game, of a story-based game. You have every right to do that. So you get her out of your way one way or another. You reunite with Jacob and Sarah Lee, and you say your goodbyes, and you're driving off with Karen in this car with this scene where the brothers are holding hands again, and it's supposed to be oh so sweet. And like I said, it doesn't click for me. Me personally, if I were in charge of writing this, I would have made Daniel staying at the church a lot less voluntary on his part. I would have either A, had Lisbeth drugging him, or B, had her blackmailing him, like saying, like, if you leave, then we'll call the cops on you and your brother, or something along those lines. Something to make it less like Daniel was staying here completely and utterly willingly, despite all of the red flags. Like, the way they wrote it, originally for episode 4 just did not work for me at all. So that's my major problem, Daniel, how his characterization was handled. And here we are, done with episode 4, winding up for the big finale, and I'll see you guys back for episode 5.